Honorable Mr. Asif Zafar, very distinguished panelists, honorable judges, both serving and retired, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'll start my speech on a different note. This hall, Khurshid Mahal, this hall and I go back a long way. I remember 36 years ago, I was sitting on this stage as a groom, and it was my walima here. The difference is that after these 36 years, once again, when I'm sitting on this stage, the groom is different. And the groom is as young as I was at that time, because I now can stick to this word that he's a young man, because Mr. Liaquat Baloch has already called him a young man. कि ना सिर्फ ये जवान हैं बल्कि जवान फिक्र भी है. As a young lawyer, and this is exactly 40 years ago, in 1979, when I started my legal practice, Mr. Asif Zafar was already a shining star in the legal profession. He was an icon then, and he still remains an icon now. And I remember that when I became a part-time lecturer in different law colleges while practicing law, we had this option. We could become part-time lecturers, delivering lectures once or twice in a week in different law colleges. I used to tell my students in the law colleges that there have been many great lawyers, but the lawyers who are known to all and sundry outside their profession also are lawyers who have another dimension to their personalities. Apart from being experts in the legal field, they have to have another dimension to their lives, and that is why they are known throughout the society and not just in their own professions. And I used to take the name of Mr. Asif Zafar, that he is not just a great lawyer, a brilliant lawyer, but he has many dimensions to his personality. And those dimensions, you know all of them: his love for art and culture, his intellectual pursuits, his academic pursuits, his writing flair, and all those examples I used to give to my young students, that if you want to be, not just to be a good lawyer, but a great one, known all over, then you have to have another dimension, and the ideal then and ideal now is Mr. Asif Zafar. I talked about my marriage. Dr. Naseem Hasan Shah was my father-in-law, late Justice Naseem Hasan Shah. And incidentally, Justice Shah and Mr. Asif Zafar were very close friends. And I do not remember any day that I met my father-in-law when he did not ask me, "How is my dear friend, Mr. Zafar?" I remember when as a judge of the High Court, I had to travel to different benches. Then as judge of the Supreme Court, for the last about 10 years, I am in Islamabad, and traveling back to Lahore every weekend. And when my father-in-law was alive, and he had become very old, and senility was already taking over, and he was repeating himself, the same questions he would repeat many a time. And I remember every weekend he would ask me 5 or 6 specific questions. And out of those specific questions one of the questions was, "How is my friend Zafar?" So this was the love and affection for Zafar Saab. And I remember that in my father-in-law's old days, I requested Ali Zafar that please arrange a meeting between Zafar Saab and my father-in-law, because my father-in-law remembers him so much. And Zafar Saab was very kind to pay him a visit. I was also present in that meeting, and that was a memorable meeting between two old friends. And I could see some awkward moments. They would like to share some good moments in their friendship, but because the son-in-law was sitting in that meeting, so they could not share those things in my presence. So in that backdrop, when Mr. Zafar asked me to write a foreword for this book, it was something to which I didn't know how to react. On the one hand, he had been my ideal, my hero in the profession. He had such a big name, and I still consider that I am a pygmy as compared to this giant of a lawyer in our society. And this hero of mine is asking me to write a foreword for his book. So I took time to digest this kind of an honor being bestowed upon me, and then I very happily and gratefully accepted this to write something. I did take some time to write it because you know that we are very busy judicially, but I did write a few pages which I would venture to read again at the end of my address. It's just 4 pages, and that would in fact sum up the book that is being launched today. The book itself, History of Pakistan Reinterpreted. I started thinking, what is history? I mean, history, if it is just the events, narration of events, then all that we needed was a book of clippings of newspapers, that this is what happened. So history is more than that. History is not just what happened in the past, but how people look at it. And this is where historians come in, and they interpret those events in their own ways. Their perceptions are different. So these different perceptions change the very concept of what had happened in the past. History starts looking different to us when we read a different book about the same events. And this is exactly what Mr. Zafar has done, that he has tried to reinterpret the history of Pakistan. So that by itself means that there are many books, there are many perceptions of history about Pakistan, but always some new facts come in, some developments take place, and then you start looking at the same events differently. This is how history not only changes its color, its perception, its message, and this is the beauty of history, that there is nothing which is constant in history, because the same event, maybe 100 years from now, the same interpretation will undergo a change. Some more information will come to light, so the whole history will change. So that's why history is not just the events taking place or the narration of the events taking place, it's the way you look at those events. Presently we are passing through a stage where I think the first part of history, the event part, that by itself is becoming more and more difficult to discern and understand. We are passing through a phase where reality is created. I was talking to some American author, and he said that presently the sole superpower in the world, we are so powerful that we are not just creating history, we are creating reality. We say that this fact is like this, and the whole world has to believe it. Not that it believes it to be true, but it has to believe it. And we have many examples in the last decade or two where we were told that this is like this, and on the basis of that telling us, certain events took place which changed this world from what it used to be. And this is a dangerous stage as far as the historians are concerned, that not only that the events previously which used to provide them basis for giving their perception of it, those events were true, but now the future historian will also have to decide and to decipher whether the event actually was true or not. So the virtual reality is being created, and then a whole history will follow on the basis of this virtual world. So this is the dangerous part that I was worried about. And in the context of this book, this is about history of Pakistan, things that have already happened. After reading this book, I was concerned that when a future historian will write about our present times, what will be his perception of the present times? When we are passing through the present, we are going through a mill, everybody is so busy, the whole thing is being unfolded, so we don't have a proper perspective. But when we look back at things, the perspective is different. So how will a future historian write about the present times? And unfortunately, what he will write will not be very pleasant. In my position, it will be inappropriate for me to comment on the other walks of life in the present day situation. Speaking of our own legal profession, I remember that in the law colleges, we used to have the best lawyers sparing time from their busy professional engagements and coming to the law colleges to deliver lectures. Now, unfortunately, things are different. There are private law colleges in which the first year student, when he goes to the second year, he becomes the teacher of the first year, because some incentives are given to him that there will be fee waivers and the administration saves the salary of a teacher. The second year student starts teaching the first year student. So you can imagine the kind of education that is being imparted. So this future historian will also write. Then what about the legal practitioners? We have brilliant names in our legal profession. We have the brightest lawyers in our community, in our society. But then there are others. The historians will also notice them. A lawyer used to argue his cases with his brain and with the use of his tongue. Now arguments are being advanced through hands and feet, through fists and kicks. The historians will not forget or forgive us for this, and this will also be recorded. What about the judges? There were judges who would take pains to come up with beautiful judgments. They would develop law. They would be concerned about quality. But unfortunately, we are under so much pressure of backlog of thousands and thousands of cases that quality is not the foremost thing in our minds. We are only focusing on quantity, the maximum number of cases that we can handle. History will record this as well. Then once we have given those judgments, even some good judgments where judges work hard, law is developed, interpretation of law is given, then in the evening, how are those judgments being analyzed? They are being analyzed by people who have nothing to do with law. They are being analyzed by people, 99.9% of the people who analyze our judgments have not even read those judgments. So history will also notice that. So I'm concerned how the future historian will judge us and would pass a judgment on us, that what kind of society were we, where we had become more and more frivolous. We have to be concerned about it. I do not share the pessimism of Shamshad Saab. I share the optimism of Salman Ghani Saab and Liaquat Baloch Saab. We can never be pessimistic about our society. We can never give up hope. This is the only country that we have. This is the only home that we have in the world. We have nowhere else to go. So pessimism is one thing that we cannot afford to have. We have to be optimistic and we have to keep on trying. We cannot give up, because then we have no other place to live in this world. So we have to strive to improve things in this very country, in this very society. And I'll just give you one small example. People think that it's a gigantic task to change different attitudes or practices in the society. I should not be talking about these model courts, but I have to. The same judges, the same lawyers, the same litigants, the same law, the same procedure, no change at all. And suddenly, everybody has started delivering in the model courts. 13,000 trials have been decided in 127 days. What? How? This is what I want to point out, that in this very system, where you think that systems are going down, they are breaking down, or maybe it is already broken down. No, things can be mended very quickly. Things can be improved very quickly. All that you have to do is that you have to, put your house in order first, get together, think of all the problems, find solutions, and then go after finding solutions and implementing them. We have done that with remarkable success. Success is not on my part, on the part of the National Judicial Policy Making Committee. The success is on the part of those judges, the same lawyers who have started delivering. Trials which used to take 3 or 4 years are now taking 3 or 4 days. The same lawyers, same judges, same law, no extra expense. So this is what I am saying, that we have to be hopeful. We can never afford to lose hope. This is the only home that we have. We have to improve it. And there are possibilities of improving it only if we apply ourselves to it. And inshallah we will keep on applying ourselves to this. Before taking more time, I'll only introduce the book to you through my foreword that I have written, so that you have a bird's eye view. We are about to read this book. And I've written about this book as follows. Sir Francis Bacon, Lord Chancellor of England in the 17th century, was generally acknowledged to be a wise man till he became worldly wise and fell from grace. Using the expression of William Wordsworth, the world became too much with him. His book Essays is full of pearls of wisdom. He starts his essay of truth as follows. What is truth? Said jesting Pilate, and would not stay for an answer. Unquote. Pilate did not stay for an answer because probably he knew and understood that there can never be a consensus over what is the real truth, as truth depends upon one's own perception of it and is thus subjective. A person's thoughts are conditioned by his own circumstances, and his perceptions depend upon his own outlook and personal experiences, and that is why the same fact may be appreciated and interpreted by different people differently. Mr. S.M. Zafar, the author of this book, History of Pakistan Reinterpreted, has concluded his introduction to the book as follows. His is a search for truth, and its interpretation is a means to unveil that truth on which no one has a monopoly. The quoted statement is the essence of this book. Mr. Zafar, as a participant and as an observer, has successfully identified pertinent instances in Pakistan's history that have remained shrouded in history or controversial, and then, following different routes of interpretation, he has tried to clarify them in a bold and remarkable way with evidence and logic. Official Secrets Acts all over the world are designed to prohibit or cloud clarity of important events of the past which constitute history. Each nation in its own interest does not like to allow the official and confidential documents to be seen or read for a number of years, and it is only when those are either released by the government or leaked by whistleblowers and become public that new facts are noticed which radically change the understanding of what happened earlier. This book contains valuable additional information which has come to light after release of the American papers. almost half a century later, and shed new light on what happened in Pakistan's past. This is crucial to understanding and shaping what may happen in our country in the future. In this book, Formation and Growth of the All India Muslim League and its final success in getting a homeland for the Muslims has been uniquely examined not only through the perspective of the personalities involved in the struggle, but also through the prism of collective wisdom of the Muslims who constituted the political party and worked through the ups and downs of its progress. He has very aptly and with his usual clarity raised the provocative issue that the Lahore resolution was not a bargain offered to the Congress party, but was an honest demand to let the two nations live in peace and harmony under the constitutional solution offered by the 1940 resolution. His views on two-nation theory and distinguishing it from ideology are supported by logic to convey to the nation that there are no minorities in Pakistan. According to him, the Muslims and non-Muslims in Pakistan constitute one nation, which is entitled to equal treatment under the law and welfare in the state of Pakistan. He believes that our flag is more than just cloth and ink, as it symbolizes and denotes the history of our nation, which is marked by the blood of those who suffered together in making the state of Pakistan. Shedding light on the Objectives Resolution of 1949, Mr. Zafar believes that the way conservative forces have used the Objectives Resolution to gain more space is revealing and proves the point that throughout history it has been the inaction of those who could have acted, the indifference of those who should have known better, and the silence of the voice of justice when it mattered most that makes it possible for evil to triumph. According to him, the present environment of terrorism in Pakistan, which our armed forces, police, and other law enforcing agencies and the nation as a whole are braving, is a result of silence of the voice of moderation and justice in the past. I have found this book to be full of observations worthy of sages and conclusions drawn from a lifetime of rich experiences. Some of such observations and conclusions are being reproduced here. Majority rule, if not made subject to rule of law, becomes tyrannical. Two nations theory was a formula for solution between Hindu majority and Muslim minority. It was repudiation of the law of numbers for asymmetrical solution for Union of India. Jinnah's efforts were to create Homo Pakistanus, which would transcend the pre-existing regional cultures. Military intervention is proportionately related to good governance. A better governed country, less chances of military intervention. And this is beautiful, this quotation from Mr. Zafar. It is not absolute authority that corrupts absolutely, but the fear of losing the absolute majority authority that corrupts absolutely. I'll say it again. It is not absolute authority that corrupts absolutely, but the fear of losing the absolute authority that corrupts absolutely. Mr. Zafar, who has been a senior advocate of the Supreme Court, Minister for Law, politician, human rights activist, and a protagonist of art and culture, is also a prolific writer who has already authored a dozen books on various subjects. This latest one is his 13th book, and we hope that this is not the last one that he writes. He surely has led a full life, a life full of multi-dimensional accomplishments, and a life which others may only dream of. During daytime, he would be a master performer in the courts, skillfully interpreting the law in all its branches. In the afternoons, he would be attending conferences and seminars, making intellectual contributions. And in the evenings, he would be seen presiding over or participating in cultural and social activities with flair of his own. The contributions, the contributions made by him in developing and shaping jurisprudence in this country are unmatched and lasting. As a young lawyer, I looked up to him. As a judge, I have admired him, and I've always envied the respect he has earned for himself. The chapter in this book, Judging the Judgments, should interest both judges and lawyers as he discusses history of the judiciary era by era, colonial, civil bureaucracy, and martial law. The chapter sheds new light on how the courts have, in spite of public opinion to the contrary, tried to steer the ship of the nation towards the shore of democracy. He has advised not to grade judgments on the basis of public opinion only. In the epilogue of the book, Mr. Zafar has summed up as follows. Pakistan was founded under historically extraordinary circumstances. A nation having a country which never existed before had to discharge huge burden of history in the shape of a choice between completely breaking away from the past. Pakistan has decided to create history. He sees Pakistan set to become a religiously more tolerant, peaceful, and harmonious society in the coming days, and he notices that power is gradually shifting into the hands of the common man. While narrating Pakistan's history of courage and resilience, he concludes that Pakistan has surprised its friends and foes alike by successfully facing all challenges. Mr. Zafar sees light at the end of the tunnel. Mr. Zafar has made a brilliant effort to discover the truth so as to stand on its vantage point, a ground, and then to assess history in its correct perspective. The pleasure that he must have experienced in this exercise has been foretold by Bacon in his essay mentioned by me in the beginning. Bacon had observed, "It is a pleasure to stand upon the shore and to see ships tossed upon the sea, a pleasure to stand in the window of a castle and to see a battle and the adventures thereof below. But no pleasure is comparable to the standing upon the vantage ground of truth, a hill not to be commanded and where the air is always clear and serene, and to see the errors and wanderings and mists and tempests in the vale below. So always that this prospect be with pity and not with swelling or pride. Certainly it is heaven upon earth to have a man to have a man's mind move in charity, rest in providence, and turn upon the poles of truth." These are my words that I could sum up. And in the end, I would say what Benjamin Franklin had said, that if you want to be remembered, then write something which is worth reading, or do something which is worth writing. Thank you very much.